Operation Desert Storm. The United States and the coalition forces faced the formidable challenge of conducting a ground war in the hot, arid expanses of the Kuwaiti and Iraqi deserts. And although the business of warfare has gone through monumental changes in the past 50 years, one aspect of waging a surface war remains as essential in the 90s as it did in the 40s: the mobility of troops, weapons, and supplies. The Humvee represents the modern-day solution to that military component. With four-wheel drive and the power and maneuverability to cover open distances quickly over hostile terrain, the Humvee is one of the key transportation devices in use today in America's military arsenals. But the critical role the Humvee plays could only have been made possible by the vehicle that preceded it: a short, stubby, and simple conjunction of unsophisticated parts and pieces, which when cobbled together, created a vehicle of legendary proportions. The Jeep revolutionized the tactics of combat and the future of civilian transportation almost overnight. One part truck, one part automobile, one part tractor, one part swamp buggy. The Jeep's unique abilities, born from its original mission to fulfill the broad needs of an army on the move, make its story one of daring ingenuity, bold corporate opportunism, and stubborn patriotism. The Jeep, the unstoppable soldier. World War I, despite its nickname as the war to end all wars, was not to be the last time great armies from great sovereign powers would take up arms. The immense numbers of dead and wounded that grimly increased with each day of that bitter conflict emphasized the staggering toll that any war commands. And regardless of the outcome, all wars have served the undeniable purpose of teaching its adversaries how best to win the next one. One of the lasting lessons that Allied armies had learned during the First World War was that relying on the horse or mule for transporting men, weapons, or supplies in the battlefield was at best inefficient and at worst unworkable. What had served adequately in previous wars was now painfully inadequate in what was becoming the dawning age of mechanized warfare.
The problem they had was not only were they slow and inefficient, but when they were fighting, it took one man to hold the horse while another man was fighting and shooting the gun. So it was terribly inefficient. Not only that, you had to bring supplies up to the horses, oats, hay, veterinary supplies, in addition to supplies for the men. So, you know, it got terribly inefficient for the Army to continue that way. They were looking for some way to modernize and mechanize.
The job of reconnaissance or scouting was also a vital military task, which up until then was conducted largely on foot or on horseback. Some 20,000 Model Ts were used by American forces for reconnaissance duty during World War I, but not entirely suited to perform all they were asked to, in part because of their standard two-wheel drive. They failed to supply the ultimate answer to the battlefield mobility that the Army sorely needed. Motorcycles had also been tried with limited success, but the uncertain geography of a wartime theater quickly revealed the motorcycle's weaknesses. As early as 1910, some years before World War I, the American military had experimented with inexpensive but agile field vehicles at several Army installations, including the Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland and Fort Riley in Kansas. This 1911 Hupmobile, stripped to almost the bare chassis, represented the state-of-the-art in all-purpose military vehicle technology being pursued by a handful of automobile manufacturers at that time. And as the imminent warning shots of World War II were echoing from Central Europe and the Pacific Rim, American military leaders were convinced a battle-ready multi-purpose vehicle would soon be a necessity.
Marmon Harrington tried to dig into the business. They had a four-wheel drive truck at the time. The problem they had was that it was was a very robust design. It was made for use in the field, in the farms. It was very heavy, and it would tend to get stuck in any kind of sand or mud, that sort of thing. So, they needed something that was lightweight, four-wheel drive, and with some power to the wheels.
Captain Robert Howie and Master Sergeant Melvin Wiley from the Fort Benning, Georgia Infantry School designed and built another possible answer to the Army's need for field mobility. It was called the Howie Belly Flopper.
The belly flopper was a unique vehicle. It had tiller steering in the rear, small four-cylinder engine to drive it. The way you drove it is you laid down prone. In other words, like you were shooting a rifle laying down, and you drove it by steering it with your feet, basically. And you had a rifle or machine gun on it. And it only stood about 24 inches off the ground, so a very low silhouette. The problem with it is that it had no springs or shocks. So you were laying down there getting your insides beat out of you as it went over any kind of terrain, not alone rough terrain. Just going over a parking lot today would be enough to give you severe rib injuries. Obviously, it didn't get very far.
During the 1930s, the American Bantam Car Company of Butler, Pennsylvania, was building small economical coupes and roadsters. In 1938, Bantam's owner, Roy Evans, offered the Pennsylvania National Guard 2 American Bantam roadsters to use during their annual summer maneuvers. Weighing only 1,000 pounds, the Bantams favorably impressed the Guardsmen with their taut handling and spirited performance. This would be the first small step in bringing Bantam and the U.S. military into an eventful relationship with enormous historical impact. Adolf Hitler's brutal sweep through Central Europe was the major focus of American military scrutiny during much of 1939. One of the more sardonic jokes being passed around U.S. Army bases claimed that Hitler had just ordered 1,000 tanks from General Motors, but rather than have them delivered, he just picked them up on the way through. With American involvement in European hostilities now almost a foregone conclusion, the Army took steps to equip itself with whatever hardware was necessary to ensure victory, including a Go-Anywhere Light Reconnaissance Vehicle, or LRV. On June 27, 1940, the Army's Ordnance Technical Committee agreed on a list of specifications it felt would define the basic size and capabilities of the LRV it was looking for. Of the 17 major specifications listed, including four-wheel drive, one of the most off-putting was the initial weight limit, a mere 1,200 pounds, later raised to 1,300. This was roughly half the weight of the production automobiles being built by Detroit in the 1930s.
What the Ordnance Department decided they needed was a